Russia has become the swing producer for the European gas market. Russia is the largest exporter of gas in the world. It has a huge gas resource, and its leading company, Gazprom, is essentially the biggest gas player in the world. It's always been linked heavily with Western markets, and now is creating links via pipelines and also via LNG gradually to the Asian market. And so essentially its relevance is that it is effectively becoming almost the sort of Saudi Arabia of gas.
Russia has tremendous potential for exporting gas and growing the domestic production, but this will happen only if Russia finds its niche and is able to increase its niche on export markets, be it in Europe or in Asia, just because Russian domestic consumption is not likely to grow much.
There are clear concerns over security of supply because of the political dimension, and there are also concerns about governance issues because Gazprom is a state-controlled company and there's limited opportunity for third parties to get involved in Russian gas. But having said that, the history of Russian gas in the West is of relatively secure supply, and it looks like it's going to become a fairly major supply in Asia as well. So the interlinkage is becoming pretty important to the entire global gas market. The Russian gas market is being driven by a combination of politics and commercial reality in markets. There is a significant amount of Russian gas available for sale, but the markets for that gas have essentially gone into decline. The European gas market's been declining for the best part of 5 years, and demand for Russian gas has also declined, one, because it's been priced relatively highly, and two, because of the geopolitical situation surrounding Ukraine and the desire to diversify away from Russian gas. So that's a kind of combination of commercial and political drivers. The same is true, demand for Russian gas in the former Soviet Union has been driven again by lower demand because of high prices and also a political desire to move away from Russian gas. And then domestically, higher prices have increased competition for the main player in the market, Gazprom, and that's created an element of competition, but also there's a political reality that Gazprom is a state company and needs to be supported. So those two drivers are kind of intermingling, and we're now seeing that played out also in the Asian market, where the geopolitics of relations with the West have caused a pivot to Asia for Russia generally, but also in the energy market. We've seen deals signed between Gazprom and CNPC. Those deals have been catalysed by politics, but the commercial reality is that the pricing has had to be competitive with other gas available to China. So you're seeing an interaction of two drivers, main drivers, with, I guess, commercial reality pointing to the ultimate end resolution, but politics often affecting timing and specific actions.
The domestic market will keep changing. Perhaps not many people notice that it has already changed a lot. There is still sort of a common belief that Russian gas market is monopolized, which is not true anymore. Last year, the biggest producer, Gazprom, accounted for just around 50% of Russian domestic gas sales. And the other half was captured by independent gas producers who keep growing their production at the time when Gazprom has to reduce its production because of lower export flows to the rest of the former Soviet Union and in some years to Europe.
The outlook is uncertain because it will depend very much on Russia, and when I say Russia I mean the Kremlin and President Putin's attitude and Gazprom's attitude towards how they want to market their gas in the world. We're entering a period where there is likely to be a surplus of global gas supply, and Russia will need to decide how it wants to compete in that oversupplied market in the short term, and then in the longer term what position it wants to establish both in Europe, in the former Soviet Union and in the Asian market. Historically it has priced its gas relative to oil, and that has tended to be at the high end of the price range, but in terms of cost of supply, Russia has a lot of very cheap gas available for sale, so it can be very competitive if it chooses to be so. And I think we're seeing the initial steps in an alteration of Russia's gas export strategy, both in the West particularly, And in Asia, we've seen a pricing strategy which has allowed Russian gas to compete with alternative supplies into China. So I think going forward, the future will depend on whether Russia decides to be ultra competitive with its gas or to accept a lower market share but at a higher price. So I guess we're seeing the evolution of that strategy right now.
There are specific regions that one has to think about with respect to Russia's market. Oh, the only region which I would mention is the Far East, because it's known that gas penetration in Russia is already very high. The gas accounts for around 53% of Russia's energy balance, because sort of gasification level in Russia are among the highest in the world, but still there are regions in Eastern Siberia and particularly in the Far East which has much lower gasification levels. So I think that if one thinks about sort of Russian gas market in terms of regions, these are regions one has to pay attention to.